A few months ago, I moved into a small apartment in a bustling city. There was an energetic atmosphere and the sounds of life outside the window. As I settled in, I was overwhelmed with hope and excitement for this new chapter of life. On the first night, however, something unusual caught my eye: a large antique mirror hanging awkwardly on the bathroom wall. It seemed out of place, and its ornate silver filigree gleamed softly in the evening light. At first, I thought it added character to the new room and left it in place. As the weeks passed, however, strange things began to happen. At first, it was a barely noticeable movement, a flicker in the corner of my eye whenever I brushed my teeth or washed my face. I attributed it to my mind adjusting to the changes in my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror had somehow changed. One evening, I was standing in front of it after a long day at work, and as I turned to grab a towel, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something behind me, a dark shadow. I turned around, but there was nothing there. I brushed it off, convincing myself I was just tired, but the feeling of unease never left me, growing stronger by the day. The next week, I had a little get-together with friends. While we were laughing and enjoying the evening, one of the friends happened to notice the mirror. "It's creepy," she remarked with a smirk. "I swear, it feels like someone is watching you." I grinned, but the remark sent a chill down my spine, reminding me of a feeling I'd experienced more than once before. Determined to confront this horror, I began to research the history of the mirror, but I was unable to find any clear information. The next night, I decided to cover the mirror with a cloth, believing that perhaps removing its influence would help me sleep. But later, in the middle of the night, I was suddenly awakened by the distinct sound of whispering. My heart raced, and I listened. It was coming from the bathroom. Against my better judgment, I went toward the sound, tearing the cloth off the mirror. At that moment, the whispering intensified. "Help me," they pleaded, echoing around the small room. I stepped back, fear gripping me. Adrenaline pumping, I rushed to the phone and dialed 911, whispering my concern to the operator. Stepping back from the mirror, I looked at my reflection and froze again. The ghostly face was clearer now, the woman's expression distorted with sadness, and she was holding out her hands as if she were trapped in glass. "Help me," she whispered again, and her voice rang through the air. Unable to bear it any longer, I covered the mirror with the cloth again, and then I jumped out of the bathroom and locked myself in my bedroom, shaking with fear. The police arrived and found nothing unusual. They assured me it was probably just a figment of stress and fantasy, but I knew something was wrong. That night, I decided I couldn't stay there another minute. I grabbed a few essentials, but out of fear, I didn't dare go to the mirror again and ran to my friend's house. I've always been wary of the dark, so when my wife and I bought our first home, an old Victorian fixer-upper, I was excited yet apprehensive. The house had an incredible charm, but it also had a dark basement that emanated a chilling presence. Most evenings, I would hear odd noises coming from beneath the floorboards, a faint shuffling or whispering. I assured my wife it was just the house settling, but deep down, I knew something was off. One dreary night, while working late on some renovation projects downstairs, a storm rolled in. I could hear the rain pounding on the roof, and the wind howled through the cracks of the old windows. Suddenly, in the midst of the thunder, I heard a distinct sound echoing from the basement, a low growl. My heart raced. I dismissed it as the wind or my imagination, but as the night wore on, my unease grew and the sounds continued. Soft footsteps followed by a whisper, almost like a beckoning call. Finally, my curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the creaky wooden stairs. The basement was dark and damp, the air thick with an unsettling feeling. When I reached the bottom, I swept a beam of my flashlight across the room, illuminating old furniture covered in dust. Then something caught my eye in the far corner. A shadow stretched along the wall, moving independently of the light. I froze, dread pooling in my stomach. It was reminiscent of a figure crouched low to the ground, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. Panicking, I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. I told my wife what I had experienced, but she was skeptical and attributed it to my overactive imagination. Later that night, when we were in bed, I heard the faint whispers again, only this time, they seemed to come from inside the house. The following morning, my wife discovered a series of scratched marks leading from the basement up to our bedroom door, and we decided to contact a paranormal investigator who discovered that the house had a dark history, so we moved out shortly after. Having spent most of my youth in the city, I recently took a break to visit my grandparents' rural home. It was isolated, surrounded by sprawling fields and dense woods, a stark contrast to city life. The first few days were peaceful, filled with hikes and stories from my grandparents. However, one night drastically changed everything. As I sat on the porch, I enjoyed the tranquility under the starry sky. Suddenly, I noticed a bright light flickering deep in the woods. At first, I thought it might be a fellow camper or someone out for a walk. My curiosity piqued, and I decided to investigate. Equipped with a flashlight, I made my way through the thick brush, guided by the flickering light. As I ventured deeper, the light seemed to dance just out of reach. I realized I was far from home, and the night's serenity morphed into a feeling of dread. I continued following the light, but then it suddenly went dark. I paused, gripping the flashlight tightly as I scanned my surroundings. Everything felt unnaturally still. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and a chill ran down my spine. Then I heard a soft voice whispering just behind me, "Come follow me." I turned, shining my light into the darkness, but there was no one there. Panic surged through me, and I glanced back at the spot where the light had been. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I saw a figure standing among the trees, barely illuminated by the moonlight. It was a man, ragged and disheveled, staring right at me. "Help me," he called, his voice a chilling echo. I stumbled backward and ran, not stopping until I reached my grandparents' home. I locked the door and told them what happened, but they just exchanged worried glances. They warned me about the stories of people who went into the woods and never came back. That night, I lay awake, haunted by the image of that man, only to later discover that a local, known for wandering the woods, had gone missing years before. They never found his body. When I was 24 years old, I had recently moved into a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was a modest place to live, but I loved the privacy it offered after a long day at work. One evening as I was getting ready for bed, the phone rang unexpectedly. It was a private number, and I hesitated to answer it. "Hello?" I said cautiously. There was a pause, and then a distorted voice whispered, "I'm watching you." Goosebumps ran down my spine. I looked around my darkened apartment, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. "Who is it?" I demanded, but the connection cut off. I brushed it off and tried to convince myself it was just a prank. Nevertheless, I had trouble sleeping that night. And the next few nights passed without incident, but too quietly. However, on the third night after the call, I was roused from sleep by the sound of a quiet tapping on the window. My heart raced and I pulled the blankets over my head, hoping it was just my imagination. The tapping became more and more insistent, rhythmic, echoing in the silence of the night. Finally, I worked up the courage to peek through the curtains. The street lamp barely illuminated the tall trees along my window, and in that dim light I could make out a figure standing motionless in the street. A fear paralyzed me as I recognized the silhouette. It was a man, his face was hidden, and he was looking directly at me. In a panic, I recoiled back and grabbed my phone to call the police. When I had already hung up the phone, the figure abruptly put his hand on my window. I dropped the phone and rushed to the door to lock it. The police arrived a few minutes later, but the man was gone. They assured me they would be patrolling the neighborhood. It was several weeks before I felt safe again. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I came across a news article about a series of attacks in neighboring neighborhoods. My heart clenched as I recognized the perpetrator in the photo. He bore a striking resemblance to the man from my window.